Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the quarterly Michigan Alliance for Greater Mobility Advancement, or MAGMA, Advisory Council meeting. I'm Oliver Gross. I'm the MAGMA Governing Board co-chair from Stellantis. The MAGMA Governing Board is convened by the Workforce Intelligence Network and is comprised of automotive OEMs, manufacturing tier 1 suppliers, and industry stakeholder groups. So just to get right into it, on behalf of the MAGMA Governing Board, I would like to thank and welcome our moderator and panel of speakers for providing data analytics on the WIN 2023 Annual Labor Market Report key findings, Deloitte Tech Trends 2024 report highlights, and Upjohn Institute e-mobility macroeconomic study. This information will inform strategic planning at the July 12 MAGMA Governing Board meeting, which will be hosted by Adam Caribbean at Toyota. I'm pleased to share with you that yesterday John Kerr from Denso accepted the nomination to serve on the MAGMA Governing Board. We welcome John, and please introduce yourself and say a few words if you'd like. I know everyone loves when I put someone on the spot.
I know John confirmed to be in attendance. If John Kerr is in attendance, please.
Yeah. I will have to make him a presenter.
Oh,
okay.
It's a webinar.
So technicality. Yeah. John, hold
on. So let me switch real quick, and there you go. He's being switched.
Excellent.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning, John.
It's good to see everybody. Good to see you. Thank you so much for the invitation. Good to see some familiar faces. And yeah, I appreciate just being invited. My name's John Kerr. I'm Senior Manager of Government Affairs for Denso Corporation. We're a Tier 1 automotive supplier with our North American headquarters in Southfield, and a supplier to all major OEMs here on the line. And again, just look forward to working with all of you in the future and for today's presentation.
Thanks, John. Great to have you on board. Okay, well, I know we started a tad late, so I'm going to get right into it, okay? Our first speaking group today is actually from Deloitte Technology Trends. We got Hilary Humphrey and Raquel Viscano here. They will be going over the most recent reports. So please feel free, take it away.
Thank you so much, Oliver. Let me share the slides. Everybody seeing this now? Let me know once you can see.
Yes, looks great.
Good. Great. I'm Hilary Humphrey, and I'm on Deloitte's Novel and Exponential Technologies team, and I will be presenting with Raquel Viscano, and we'll be sharing Deloitte's tech trends. I'll let Raquel quickly intro herself.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I've been working in Deloitte's emerging technology practice for the last 7 years, and I can tell you it is a very exciting time to be alive. Lots of interesting tech trends happening today. It feels like the future is coming faster than ever before. So I'm with Hilary, very excited to be sharing with you this morning.
Great. All right, everyone. To set us off, I want to give a quick foundational overview on how we put together these tech trends. So each year, our team leverages Deloitte's global reach. It's a really broad reach, as you all might know, to seek out the future through interviews with leading orgs, as well as client executives and conversations with folks who live at the cutting edge of technology and research, like academic researchers and venture capitalists. We've been at it for 15 years. As you can see here, it's Deloitte's 15th annual report. And that isn't necessarily to pat us on the back, right? It's more so that we've learned quite a bit in the process over these 15 years. And most importantly, we've learned what not to do. You can see on this next slide, or rather not see, this is how we used to do it, right? About 10 or so years ago. And the approach has its place, but if anybody's looking at this slide, can you realistically understand anything that's going on it? Probably not. Not to mention, no key, various symbols, very small writing, but more so, it's just a little bit too full. And that level of comprehensiveness we found doesn't correspond with the higher accuracy. So a few years ago, we returned to first principles and we came up with 6 forces that you'll see here. We have our top 3, which are elevating forces. And those are the pieces that are driving IT forward. There's a through line, a consistent trend for each of them. Interaction, you can see on that far left with simplicity above it. And interaction is growing increasingly simple as the years go on, as the tech becomes more advanced. So instead of interfacing with a computer that might be the size of a gymnasium, you can now ask Siri to do a math problem without even taking your phone out of the pocket, for example, or even, ChatGPT, right? If we're going to go even further there. And then on the information side, what we're really seeing this year especially is increasingly intelligent AI. And then finally, on that right side for computation, we're seeing a trend towards abundance in compute that might even take us beyond traditional binary compute. And then we have the 3 grounding forces on the bottom. And those are critical to the elevating forces in particular. They support the elevating forces and serve as the foundation. That's business of technology, cyber and trust, and core modernization. So important to hit the elevating forces, we'll show those first, but then the grounding forces are really those support pillars. You can see here, these are our last 10 years of tech trends as you move down, newest at the top. And what you see is that the trends have a through line from, you can see here, like 2015 all the way to 2024. And the key here is that each of these trends in these through lines are evolving. It isn't, as like the media loves to say, unprecedented. It all has precedence, and it's based in the future or the past technologies, based in the future technologies. So without further ado, we will get into it. Raquel is going to first walk you through the elevating forces, and then I will finish us up with the grounding forces.
Awesome. Thanks, Hillary. So as Hillary just mentioned, the way that we think about information technology broadly is between these 2 dimensions of elevating forces and grounding forces. Now, I know that we kind of introduced like a lot of terms right off the bat here, but elevating forces, you can think about these as your traditional growth vehicles, right? That interaction piece. How do we interact with technology, both within the organization and with our customers? Information. What is the information we're actually gathering and using within our IT processes? And computing is what is the right resource allocation for how we go about processing that information. These are our elevating forces, traditional growth vehicles. But as Hillary mentioned, none of that can happen unless you have your grounding forces in place, unless you're thinking about the business of technology or how we empower engineers in our organization. We often say the phrase, software is eating the world, or every company will be a tech company. But even if that is the case, I don't think we treat tech employees like tech employees sometimes. So how do we reinvigorate that engineering experience? Cyber and trust is about security, and core modernization is about modernizing legacy applications. So these 6 trends are these 6 different forces, whether you're in 2024, whether you're 20 years ago, whether you're even in the 1830s, we've done research, like ENIAC wasn't the first computer that was constructed or devised, it was actually in the 1830s. Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace. These forces all still hold. So let's dive into that first one on interaction. So what we're seeing on the interaction piece is what we call interfaces in new places, spatial computing in the industrial metaverse. So much of AR, VR, or extended reality, if you're thinking about the whole gamut, initially started in the consumer market. We say that technology typically moves from tech, so novel tech, to toy. People are just playing around with it. Then to tool. Oh, now we're deriving business value from it. And so same thing here with AR, VR, and XR. We're now starting to see an industrial metaverse emerge where businesses are truly starting to realize the power that can have in their organization. I think 2 things here, especially as it relates to this group. One is for folks who are typically hands-on workers. And there's 2 use cases I just want to highlight. So for hands-on working, the last thing you need is another device to add to your workload because you're working with your hands. You don't even want to have to pull another phone, another tablet, another something. So that's part of this interfaces in new places. It's almost getting beyond the device itself, right? Allowing people who work with their hands to be able to more effectively interact with technology. And the second piece I'll say here is for folks who also work with their hands, the training piece is a huge piece of this as well. So it's a lot different when you are simply watching a training online versus actually doing that training in person. And so we're seeing a lot of cases for AR, VR simulation of training, especially in roles that are rare, expensive, or dangerous to be able to receive that training environment in. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things that Hilary mentioned, which I just want to call out and double click on, is all of our trends are informed by crunchy case studies from market. So I'll highlight two of them here. One is from Stanford Medicine, where surgeons are using 3D virtual reality models of patients based on MRIs, and they use this to train and practice different procedures. And this is a really good use case showing how training can help save costs and it's more effective. We run studies for different training environments, and people who use AR and VR in their training processes retain the information better. They complete tasks more quickly, and they have a better understanding of the end-to-end process for what they need to accomplish. So training really is a big market here. The second use case is from Hyundai Motor, in which Hyundai built a full-scale factory simulation to analyze their operations. Now, you might be familiar with the phrase, measure twice and cut once. Well, when it comes to enterprise simulation, it's not just measure twice, it's measure 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, and then cut once. And so we're looking at ways for how can we bring the physical to the digital? That way we can make smarter decisions, more informed decisions in the physical. So that's what this first chapter is about. It's about the industrial metaverse and that maturation from toy to tech to tool for businesses. The second trend we'll dive into is on information. Now, I don't think I'm saying anything crazy when I say that generative AI has been the hot topic of last year and likely this year. I think where we're at in the journey is there was a lot of interest, a lot of hype early on. People are throwing a lot of money at this. Organizations are wondering, prioritizing use cases and saying, how can generative AI work for me? Now we're starting to see the investments pay off for those generative AI investments. If you jump to the next slide here, what I really think is needed more than ever, though, in an age of generative AI, is that we really need generative humans. So Gen AI is a force multiplier for human ambitions. So if I were to get on any foundation model and simply type in, paint me a picture of a sunset, well, I'm just going to get an average picture of a sunset back. But if I were to go on and say, paint me a picture of a dolphin swimming in the lake as a full moon overhead with a hurricane in the back, or whatever it is, right? I might get back a really interesting photo, something that might not exist before. And so in an age where information is being democratized through generative AI, I think what matters more than ever is the human element of this. Two examples here that I really do like. Shutterstock. Now you would think with Shutterstock, right, generative AI, you're like, wow, that's talk about an overlap with your business. But what Shutterstock decided to do is that they would pay artists who were involved in the training for their models. This not only rewarded artists accurately for the work that they contributed to Shutterstock, but it also opened up a huge new market because now as a user, I can go on, and if I don't find a picture I can like that an artist has already created, I can generate an image and the artist will still get credit for that. So I think this is a really good example of how, when done correctly, we can still reward creatives while also unlocking new business value. The second one here in Eastman Chemical is about an AI-enabled tool to extract insights from notes during sales calls. The way that I think about generative AI in my life is, what are the things that I am too busy to do, that I don't want to do, and that I need help doing? And when those three things come along, I ask myself, how could generative AI make my life easier? So I think some of those are the really good use cases to start with for organizational transformation. But yes, it wouldn't be a Tech Trends 2024 presentation if we didn't talk about generative AI. All right, let's go to the next trend here, which is on computation. Smarter, not harder, beyond brute force compute. Now, this compute conversation, I think, is more important than ever, especially with the rise of AI over the last year, because there's a lot of questions being called to say, hey, do we have the compute infrastructure, the compute capabilities necessary to fuel this AI advancement? Well, I think in the compute conversation, we're seeing a couple different things emerge. The first is that we're seeing organizations more thoughtfully analyze their compute infrastructure and resource allocation. So what I'll say here is, in the past, I think it was move everything to the cloud immediately. It must go, right? Fire sale. Now I think organizations are starting to think through, okay, where does it make sense to have on-prem infrastructure? Where does it make sense to have my cloud compute? Which cloud provider should I be using? And that thoughtful cost-benefit analysis is starting to, the pendulum might starting to swing back. That way, organizations are being really very conscious of their resource mix when it comes to compute. The second thing that I'll say here is that there's an entirely new computing paradigms that we are looking at. You know, we say the phrase a lot, innovation loves constraint. And so when you're in an environment where compute is constrained, lots of innovations can take hold. Our team looks at things like quantum, we look at neuromorphic computing, we look at stochastic computing and optical computing, and all these different ways that hopefully we can continue this compute party and power all the innovations that we're working towards. I'll give 2 examples here, though, of ways that organizations are working smarter, not harder when it comes to this. So the first is from a Belgian retailer. So instead of saying, hey, listen, we're just going to add more compute infrastructure, they went through a thoughtful cost-benefit analysis and said, actually, by integrating our operational and information technologies, that's how we can save. Similar thing with State of Utah's Office of Recovery Services. Instead of just simply saying, okay, we need more compute, they migrated their mainframe apps from COBOL to Java, and it allowed them to streamline their code base in a way which they didn't need to. So I think maybe the even higher level trend for compute is thoughtfulness in resource allocation, thoughtfulness and cost-benefit analysis. And I would even say what's really needed here is the return of architects and architecture, because how can you do this thoughtful analysis without that? So the primacy, once again, on the human factor, the human element here. So these are our 3 elevating forces from interaction, information, computation. The need for more architects. Hillary, I'm going to punt that over to you now, because the grounding forces will kick off with the business of IT. And what a better way to kick off grounding forces?
Absolutely. Thank you, Raquel. So next up, we have the grounding forces. And if you're thinking of these like in terms of a meal, right? The grounding forces, well, the elevating forces might be more like a truffle sauce. They're exciting, they're fun, everyone loves them, innovative, expensive, one might say. But the grounding forces are like the protein source. They're like your chicken breast of the meal. And so they're less flashy and certainly less likely to generate multi-billion-dollar startup valuations, but they're fundamentally important to success. And so they're critical to cover. But also what Deloitte's found when we're looking at businesses that lead is that the organizations that are leading get these right consistently. It's not a one and done. It's a consistent force. And if they try to reach for the elevating forces without they're out of luck. So to start us off, first we have DevX. And this is talent. So it's particularly from the developer experience. So our prior thesis that all of you have probably heard is that every company is a tech company, right? And we've seen that borne out, and I'm sure everyone has seen that, particularly in your positions. So along those lines, any tech org is only as good as the people who make it up. So every org is only as good as its tech talent. What we're seeing here is that elevating the tech talent experience has been a critical mission. And we call that developer experience, or DevX. And it's an area where Deloitte has personally put in a lot of investment recently. We've launched Deloitte Engineering and also acquired a couple of software engineering companies. And it's the recognition that what attracts your typical employee, call that, strategy and ops consultant, not that I know any, won't necessarily attract tech talent, right? So they're seeking to support their tech talent by giving them the tools they need to be more productive, because they found that is what That's what really retains tech talent. Which retention, we found, you can see in the now, has been a bit of an issue recently. So enterprises are continuing to accelerate their digital transformation goals, but they're finding it increasingly challenging to hold on to tech talent. And that might be buggy code, non-inclusive cultures. The list kind of goes on that. But companies are finding it more and more important to look into retention strategies. And so what we've seen a couple different companies do, there's a couple different ways to do it. You can see on the right, CarMax. The way that they did this was they shifted from a project-based operating model to a product-based operating model. And that enabled them to have these cross-functional teams that were able to test more rapidly and get feedback from their customers and iterate on the products, which led to higher developer satisfaction and stronger products, which is a intended and unintended benefit as well. And then Citibank went in a little bit of a different direction. And what they did was they defined career paths that were different than your traditional career path, where you might be familiar with progression through a company, right? Especially for technical folks, where in the beginning, they're mostly coding, they're developing, they're doing engineering work. Then as they move up the ladder at their company, as they should, they start to manage folks more and more, and they spend less of their time working on technical items. And that led to technical folk dissatisfaction, right? As they were more interested in staying at a deeper technical depth. So Citibank was able to reform that career path to stay technical as they move up the ladder. And they had great success with that. So looking at what's next, we anticipate that with the right tools and processes in place, enterprises will empower every employee to be an engineer. We're seeing low code, no code solutions that are making the bar for engineering a little bit lower. So these folks, your average employee is not going to replace an IT staff, right, with technical training and a degree in information technology. But it will allow the smaller problems to be solved by employees that are not necessarily technically trained, which will allow the tech folks to focus on bigger issues. So then that sets us up next for, this is personally my favorite trend. So when folks think about cyber attacks, they usually think malware, thumb drives, like hackers in dark rooms, right? But there's another way into computers and IT systems that take advantage of what is often the weakest link, right? Does anybody have any ideas on what that is? I know it's a webinar, so most of you are on mute. Raquel, what do you think? What do you think the weakest link to the org's cyber feature is?
This feels like cheating, Hillary, if I answer.
Email.
Human beings?
Yep, human beings, exactly.
I like
Just
email
mild
though. I
cheating.
think those go hand in hand.
Oh, email, it does go hand in hand. Yep, which you will see. So the bar to creating deepfakes, targeted phishing emails, as you just said, and misinformation attacks has been lowered practically to the floor over the last year as Gen AI has progressed. You can see just a couple of months ago, we were reading in Hong Kong, scammers used deepfakes of a company's CFO, actually the literal voice of the company's CFO, they generated it, to scam a company out of $25 million. So this is now, we're seeing it now. And luckily for us, the defense mechanisms are advancing as well as the scamming abilities. So a host of new tools is already making its way to the scene. The two examples you can see here, the first is Reality Defender, and that is a platform that uses AI models that are trained to detect artificial content, generated content. And they've had a great success, Reality Defender. That's a really cool company. I'd recommend looking into it. Then the other is Intel. And what Intel did is they created a model that looked at the blood flow in on a video, like for a human's face. And that's something that models haven't been able to really nail yet. And so it can tell the difference between generated content and real content, which, in the case of that case in Hong Kong, that's critical, but also looking forward at elections and generated videos at large. So looking next, something that's come up in a lot of our client calls is quantum, right? And quantum is something that people are always saying is kind of 5 years out, 5 years out, 5 years out. We're slow to trust quantum actualization, right? But it is coming, and this will allow machine learning models to train on less data, which will make these deceptive artificial media more convincing, but also it will make the defense mechanisms that much stronger. So as it says on the slide, cat and mouse game, right? The attack and the defense will increase in maturity. All right. I know everyone was looking forward to this one. Last but not least, we have core modernization. Perhaps the most exciting part of the presentation. So the main message we want to convey for this one is that in order to get all those other forces, this is truly the grounding force of the grounding forces. In order to get those other forces, you have to look at core modernization in a proactive and a holistic way, using a wellness mindset. So today's orgs are seeing that tools are pretty quickly becoming aged and becoming out of date. Around 70% of tech leaders view this accumulating tech debt as the #1 cause of productivity loss and a real barrier for innovation. So we're anticipating a pivot to wellness, specifically around 5 key areas, and that's infrastructure, data, applications, workforce, and cyber risk and trust, as we just covered cyber on the last one. So by consistently monitoring these, we'll find that orgs are able to get ahead of the curve, which will allow them to innovate when they want, where they want, without worrying about technical debt. On the right, you can see that AWS and Enbridge have both done these in different ways. Both are interesting. I know we're running close to our 20 minutes, so I won't go into deep detail on the modernization there. But looking ahead, what we're seeing here, which is, I think, incredibly exciting, is adaptive AI, which has the potential to heal code without supervision. So these wellness checks, this constant physical, right, to make sure that your tech is up to date and functioning well and modernly, will be able to be automated. And I'm very excited about that personally. I think that adaptive AI is fascinating. And that is a wrap. Thank you all for listening. Please read the report. It is really interesting and has a lot more content than we've been able to share with you today. You can see the report link. It can be accessed via the QR code. Also, if you just search Tech Trends 2024, it'll show up. And I believe the link will also be sent out along with slides after the presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Raquel and Hillary. I think it was really insightful. I appreciate the core training. Thank God we had plenty of strength but no spinning. That's always good for IT.
Absolutely.
So with that, I'm actually very, very happy now that our moderator has arrived, and I'd like to do the introductions to that. So our esteemed moderator today is Alicia Douglas, who's the founder and CEO of the Water Rising Institute. She has been an executive and entrepreneur for over 30 years of experience in international affairs, economic development, entrepreneurial, mentoring, philanthropy, sustainability, public policy, and stakeholder engagement. She has founded 3 startups and is an international speaker on women's empowerment. Her ability to catalyze collaboration amongst global stakeholders has inspired the development of many impactful initiatives, such as the Water Women Project. Alicia has participated in fund development initiatives across multiple sectors, raising $500 million over the past 2 decades. She has successfully produced an average of 5 major strategic events annually, engaging as many as 5,000 participants. She is currently involved in the She Changes Climate, UN Women Empowerment Principles, Global Compact Leaders, and other initiatives involving the private and public sectors. Out of all of her roles, her highest priority is being mother of 4 daughters, which I find amazing since I have 3 sons, and I know how challenging that can be. I think her commitment to ensuring future generations have access to healthy, safe water and gender equality rights. Alicia, please introduce yourself and feel free to go. It'll be the second speaker now, but thank you very much.
Oliver, thank you so much, and thank you, to the team. And I do apologize. We had a little bit of a glitch with the entire Microsoft upgrade, and it wasn't letting me in. So you've got to love the technology aspect of with what we're dealing with, and then also, shout out to Hillary and to Rachel for an incredible presentation. I mean, you guys just really rocked it, especially on all that data. So just a few things is that we're going to have some questions and answers, our questions and AKA answers from those that are on our panel today. Please put those in the chat if you get if you have a question, and I will be also asking some questions to our next panelist. And then, also just, if you guys have got, like a question in between, I like to organically flow when I moderate. So like if you have a question while people are presenting, just go ahead and, raise your hand, and I'll wait until they pause, and then we can go ahead and we can ask that question. So again, I'm just really excited to be here and to be with you guys on this incredible Friday. So let me make an introduction to Michael Horgan. He took over Upjohn's Institute as president in 2019. He has served as an associate commissioner with the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. He came to the BLS as a labor economist in 1986, and after 6 years as an economy professor at Williams College in his native Massachusetts, he rose to the ranks as division chief, bravo, and director of the National Longevity Survey Program, assistant commissioner to 2 offices. He has served as an associate commissioner for offices of price and living conditions before taking his role of associate commissioner in the Office of Unemployment and Statistics in 2018. So Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. And it truly is, just listening to your tenure, I'm just really excited to have you.
Well, thank you, Alicia. And can everyone hear me, first of all? You can hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Certainly.
And you can
Yes,
see
we can
the
hear
screen.
you.
You can see the screen?
Yes.
Good.
Yes,
okay.
you're on the lithium battery production
Yep,
for the United
yep.
States. Brilliant.
So lesson learned, never hit update when you're about to go into a conference, right, Alicia?
Oh my goodness. Yes, exactly. Definitely.
So all right. So this morning the unemployment rate and the employment payroll employment came out, and that was really kind of the work that I did at the BLS. So it's near and dear to my heart. This is a really fun and exciting and meaningful and important project. What I want to do is to talk about the goals, the conceptual basis of the project, and then run through how we did it and what the results are. So first, for the goals, the basic goal is to provide guidance to the Michigan EV Academy, to the state of Michigan's joint consortium of community colleges, workforce developers, employer partners. Basically, there's a job to do, which is who are we going to hire, who do we need to train, and how many, as we make the transition to an EV economy, to a mobility economy. And so when we first started, we were thinking that we would tackle the whole thing. We quickly disabused ourselves of that assumption. And we decided to take a look at one specific market, which is batteries, the production of lithium-ion batteries. And so our focus, we've done this study for both the US and for Michigan. I'll focus on Michigan for this presentation, and time permitting at the end, I'll show you the results for the US. But let me first just tell you all the slides I'm going through, what the conceptual basis for this is, what we're about to do. In a perfect world, we would identify all of the businesses, the names and addresses, industry codes, the occupations of every business that's involved in the lithium-ion supply chain. Now, we can't do that perfectly. We come close in some cases, but we'll be very transparent about how we use the data that we have to try to approximate that first concept. The second is to develop a model that relates output to input, output to employment. How much employment do you need to produce a certain level of what is considered output in the lithium-ion space, which we will define as gigawatt hours of production of lithium-ion battery production capacity. And then third, what's the future state? if we describe the current, that's great. But we need to know is where are we going as an economy, whether that be Michigan or the U.S. And one of the things I want to say is that we make a stab at that. That future state may be one where we get there 5 years later or sooner, depending on market conditions. And so one of the things, as I show in the last bullet, we have to point out the risks to achieving that future state. But once we have those projections of output, then what is the associated employment, and what do we assume about productivity? What do we assume about capacity utilization? And finally, how does that allow us to say something about the occupational and training needs that are associated with that future state? So that's kind of the concept. In terms of the sections of this presentation, I'll look at the supply chain, the database of companies we use, how we validate the data. I'll be quick on that. It's the boring stuff that people usually run away from you when you start talking about data validation. We will establish the relationship, the output-input relationship, and then look at how we project occupational employment. So to start, we have a great database from basically it's DOE through NatBat, NREL. It's a consortium that all the firms that are in the battery supply chain are providing information to NREL and NatBat that basically provides a lot of information, including employment, and also if they're on the part of the supply chain that produces the cell batteries or wraps them, they also show what their gigawatt hours of production are. And so this is just a listing of all the data that's in there. The thing I want to point out is that one thing that's missing is the industry code. We don't have the industry of these establishments. So that's one of the things we had to deal with. If you think about the supply chain, the basic thing, there's a lot of stuff on the slide, but let me just look at 3 terms. The stuff that goes in, the upstream, the raw materials. Once you have that, how you fabricate, how you manufacture, how you do the cell production and the wrapping of the cell. And then how do you downstream it? How do you bring it to market? And also the downstreaming also includes recycling and reuse as well as research. So to get kind of specific with this wonderful database, we have it for Michigan. What we have is employment along 10 different supply chain segments. And supply chain segments 4 and 5 are the ones that are involved in the actual production. 1 through 3 are the upstream, 4 and 5 is the production, and then 6 through 10 is the downstream. And you can see the estimate for the year 2023 of 7,500 employees. And you can see the relative shares of employment by each of the supply chains. And obviously, a very large share of that is in production, 4 and 5, 18.7 and 46.9%. According to this database, in 2023, the capacity, productive capacity of the supply chain was 32.2 gigawatt hours of production, annual production a year. So with that in mind, remember, we don't have NAICS. And so, oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself. This is just a representation of that output relationship. What we're assuming is that across all of the employment in the supply chain, the gigawatts per year, we're assuming a stable relationship between the supply chain employment and the productive capacity in cells and electrodes. We want to identify the industry of each of these establishments, and we want to put it into the NAICS classification system. The reason for doing that, another sort of transparency in our assumptions, is that with an industry identifier, we have a database that allows us to say, for each of those industries, what's the occupational staffing pattern? So that's the first way we get to occupations. And so what we did is we did our homework. We had, for the US, nearly 800 establishments that we had to look up the NAICS code, and we used a variety of different sources to do that. One of the things that would be an improvement in this study is if we could actually get confidential data from the BLS to verify their NAICS code, and that's something that we're thinking about. So the 7533 I quoted for the supply chain, I can now quote it by what we call NAICS industries. And if you look at the left, these are what we term 3-digit NAICS. And so it's a certain level of aggregation. The reason that we chose 3-digit, and we could have gone, it's possible we could have gone to a more detailed industry list, is that the occupation data that we have, the occupation industry data that we have, is actually at the 3-digit industry level. So you can see, for example, a very large share of employment in the lithium-ion battery supply chain is in electrical equipment, appliance, and components manufacturing, nearly half. So how do we then, if we've described the current state, in other words, in 2023, we have, imperfectly, but we have all the firms that are involved in the supply chain, and we have their NAICS industry codes. And I've alluded to the fact that that allows us to look up from a different database the occupational staffing patterns. The next step is to say, well, what's the output going to be in the future year? So we looked at a ton of different data sources, including this NatBat NREL data that were used. And they also give an estimate. But we ended up going with the range that we got from the Argonne National Lab, which is somewhere between 97 and 136. We chose 136, which is a little bit less than the topside estimate we found from the Environmental Defense Fund. We can modify our results based on changing the assumption as we know more, as we get closer to the future state. But we went with 136 as our future state that we're aiming for. And our goal is, with that output, is to identify the employment level and the occupational staffing patterns, and therefore what the training needs will be. All right, so just to give a caveat before we get into the results, what are the risks to achieving this future state, this productive capacity? Well, one obviously is market demand, and we've seen it in the last couple of months. There has been a slowdown in demand for EV cars. It seems like there is this relationship between the growing infrastructure for electrical charging stations and the demand in particular areas, which I think might be a useful next study that we could do. But as markets start to develop, market demand seems to be changing. So a more mature market for electrical infrastructure may have rising market demand, but we can see that market demand is one of the factors that's going to affect the timing of all this. Critical raw materials. What is the reliance we have on imported raw materials, and how is that affected by global market as well as geopolitical conditions? Construction, just the mere time it takes and the bureaucracy it takes to construct a lot of the firms, a lot of the businesses that are needed for battery production. And then obviously related to the workforce, what is the technical expertise that's needed, and how is that achieved, both in terms of hiring third-party contractors that may have it, or doing training of your workers as they transition from ICE to EV. The modeling assumptions that we're going to make in terms of the future state is we're assuming that capacity utilization rates are held constant from 2023 to 2030. The main reason for that is we didn't have any good information to suggest otherwise. We could do in a future study some simulations of that, but it's really going to, I don't think, change the distribution of occupations. It'll just change the actual levels. For productivity, we took a very close look at the 3-digit industries that I showed you, and really the productivity levels did not change dramatically. There were some cycles, but they were relatively stable across all the 3-digit industries that we looked at. So as a result, we assume no large productivity impacts over the next 7 years. Although the previous talk may suggest that we could have some real game changers in the future. And then finally, one of the big problems in measuring employment in the statistical system is that we have very little good information on contract and temporary labor. We know what the employment of the temporary help labor industry is, but we don't know their industry of placement. So the use of temporary or self-employed or contract labor in a particular, say, battery plant is something that we do not measure very well. And so that's a deficiency, not just of our analysis, but of, in some sense, the statistical system. All right, so here are kind of the results, and I want to talk a little bit about sort of how we got there. But basically, if you take a look at the NAICS industries, you can see that what we're basically saying is that as we grow from a 32.2 gigawatt production to 136, we're assuming a proportional increase in the employment in each of the supply chain segments, and therefore in each of the NAICS industries that are associated with that. The one exception is mining. With mining, we kept it constant at 400 for a couple of reasons. One, mining employment grows very, very slowly to begin with. It doesn't seem to follow this proportional change. Second, the amount of time it takes for permitting, the uncertainty of the supply, the development of economically viable sites seemed to suggest to us that it was difficult to justify a proportional increase in the employment in mining. In the 400, the lack of growth is actually very consistent with what we observed with employment trends in mining over the last 10 years. So how do we project the occupational employment? So we have this sort of future state with output, with industry employment, and now I've got to tell you how we derive occupations. And basically what we have is a really detailed data on 3-digit occupational shares, occupational employment, and the shares by employment in each of those 3-digit NAICS industries. We also have from the state of Michigan, from the LMI office, or DTMB, if that's familiar, we have projections of how these occupational shares by industry are going to change over the next 10 years. And so we use those changing shares as a basis for saying, what will the shares look like in our future state? And having done that, what we get is the following sort of results. And take a look at the first one, assemblers and fabricators, and look at the OCC code. It's 51-2000. I will call that a 3-digit code. There's detailed occupations underneath, which I'll show you in a minute. But that's the level we were able to report the results at. If you're an aficionado of the standard occupational classification system, these are called, quote, minor occupations. But associated with the increase in gigawatt production and employment by industry and knowing occupational employment by those industries, we find that assemblers and fabricators will grow by 4420. And one of the things that is an innovation that we introduce is we're able to develop in our model an estimate of the annual job openings associated with that employment change. The concept there is that employment can change, in this case, between 2023 and 2030 by 4,400. But what's really important for workforce development is how many annual job openings needed to be filled every single year. And for that, we have 637. And that's the number that theoretically would need to be trained or at least be skilled up in order to work as assemblers and fabricators. So you can see we listed these from the largest employment change down to the smallest. I have 2 slides. And it goes all the way down to the supervisors of install, maintenance, and repair workers. One of the things that we would love help on is the following slide. Here we have assemblers and fabricators. I said that our results were at that, quote, 3-digit level. What we have here is basically a 4-digit occupation. 2021 is one example. Coil winders, tapers, and finishers. All these detailed occupations are ones that that my co-author, Eric, and I apologize, I should have introduced in the beginning, time constraints. My co-author, Eric, and Dakota and I selected as ones that are most relevant for EV battery production. What I would love to do is talk to a lithium battery plant operator and find out, are they hiring coil winders? Are they hiring structural metal fabricators? In other words, I think we got it right with the assemblers and fabricators. I'd like to know more about these detailed occupations because, quite honestly, that's who the EV Jobs Academy is going to have to come up with training for. And so the rest of this is just really the same results where I'm listing the detailed occupations. What we get for each occupation, in addition, which I think is really interesting, is the typical education needed for entry. And you can see that it's high school here. For other production occupations, it's also high school, mainly. And then for engineers, it's all bachelor's and above. So if you look at all these occupations in the education that's needed to enter, this is the main result that I want to end with, which is most battery-related production jobs will require less than a BA degree. We're estimating that it's about 68%. And BA and above is about 32%, which is not that different from the current occupational education distribution that you see in 2023. In terms of training, some of the ones that are less than a BA don't require training. They just require short-term, like 2-week training. But what we found is that 45.4% of those that will be hired with less than a BA plus either medium-term or long-term training. And for BA and above, that similar figure for medium and long-term training is about 29.6%. So we have a little bit of a divide in terms of skills. Both are very valuable, but I think it suggests that the real importance on the efforts that are taking place right now in the EV Jobs Academy in terms of providing courses, CTE courses at the community college level. And with that, Alicia, I have no idea if I went overtime or not, but you came back on board, so I figured I must be close to being out of time.
Yes.
I won't show these. I won't show the results for the U.S. unless I have 2 minutes.
No, no, and maybe that will be kind of going into some of our questions that we have for you. So let me go ahead and so thank you for providing that very important data, and I have to say that it was really interesting to see the fact that the percentages below having a degree in college and just focusing on, just going straight in to more of an associate. So thank you for sharing some of that information. So what are your thoughts about the next steps in analyzing the projections of occupation for lithium-ion battery productions?
Well, I kind of mentioned it. One of the things I want to do next is to go to an auto supply plant and find out what they say. The other thing that we're looking at is we're working with the state of Michigan to ask, can we actually identify those same plants in their confidential databases and get those occupations? And I'd like to do that at the Michigan level and at the national level. Then in terms of future studies, there's a number of different dimensions. One that I think is really interesting, I'm not sure we'll do this project, but if you look at electrification, which is absolutely critical, we had a fellow at a conference I was at who was bidding on these electrification projects, and he said, I don't have problems filling the jobs for electrification for fast charging stations. That's not my problem. My problem is filling behind them when I move those people over. And so I think there's we focus a lot on what we need for EV, but I think we need to pay attention to what we need when those workers go into EV and what's left behind.
No, those are all really good points. And, last night I was at the event with the Michigan Central Station, and just, the big shout out and with what we're going to be seeing, from that center. And there was so many entrepreneurs that I had the chances to talk to, on the EV space. And, to your point is that the more information that we can also start getting back from those data sets from these other sources is also going to be critical in being able to project what we need to be doing for the future for these jobs. So my next question is that, how does the recent slowdown in EV demand affect your analysis?
So we try to state it very clearly in the report that our fundamental belief is that we're going to EV, and that we think that to the extent that we did a good job identifying the distribution of occupations. So I'm less concerned about the 136 assumption or whether it hits 2030 or hits in 2034. What I'm really concerned about is, did we get the occupations right so that we have an idea next year what the community colleges need to train up for or what the industries need to train up for? And so the slowdown absolutely has an effect on the timing, but I'm not, this sounds a little bit overly maybe confident or optimistic, but I think if we got it right, it won't change the distribution of occupations that need training and the kind of training they need. So I'm hoping that's the contribution we can make to this space.
Thank you so much for answering that. Okay, so here's another question. So with Ford and GM's reducing of EV production objectives due to heavy financial losses with EVs, can the production battery manufacturing skill or job skills be broadened enough to allow workers to shift to other job descriptions? Because as we know, it is about supply and demand.
Sure, and I'm actually going to flip that question, and maybe I'm just going to be viewed as overly optimistic, But I think if the alternative that is embodied implicit in the question is to slow down and go to PHEVs or go to hybrids as an interim step and do that longer, I actually think that's a benefit in terms of firms figuring out how to make the transition of ICE workers and training them to EV. Because when you're training them on a basically something that still has an internal combustion component, and that is true in both PHEV and in hybrid, then it gives them a little bit of a longer lead time to say, how do we take the workers that will still be here, that aren't retiring, and get them dual trained for that future state? So again, maybe I'm being optimistic, but I think it is actually helpful to firms in some way.
Yeah, and the other thing is too, is I was going to say too, Mike, is if you want to be able to show that US data, we would like to be able to see it. But we also have a question in, so what is the likelihood of companies taking on the responsibilities for training rather than individuals having to pick the right training program?
No, that is an absolutely terrific question.
Yeah,
and
thanks, Trina, for asking that.
Yeah, and let me just give two quick examples. In the state of Michigan, we have the Going Pro Talent Fund.
Okay.
And the Going Pro applies to any industry. And what it is I love it because it basically says to a business, what do you need? And apply for these funds and submit a competitive proposal. And the money in the Going Pro has been going up every single year. What it does is it creates a collaboration between the business and where they're going to do the training. So rather than the community colleges saying, what courses do we need to offer? The business is saying to the community college, we need these courses. We have a Going Pro fund. Well, even in the absence of a Going Pro fund, I think collaboration between business, the workforce development community, Michigan Works, and also the community colleges is absolutely key. If those three are in silos and don't talk to each other, then there's a problem. But we've had a lot of conversations with Ford and the Blue Oval plant, and they are very, very committed to having these collaborative conversations. So I love the question because I think the future is not to operate independently. I think the future is to create incentive structures so that you get the kind of collaboration in the courses then that are very, very meaningful to the training that is needed.
No, and thank you for saying that, because last night, again, I'm just coming off of, the Michigan Central station and just the excitement around the future and the future of with what we're doing, not just in the auto sector, but just really within Southeastern Michigan and Michigan, everything from the semiconductors to the EV batteries to all this future, innovation. And I also think that K through 12 has an important aspect to this too, because we really need to be building that in the pipeline and really having more of those jobs available upon graduation, in that. And so I'm really looking forward to also seeing if you want to present that data really quick on the US, that would be really good, because again, when we start looking at projections and what we can be doing starting especially for that 7th, 8th grade too, right? And how we can be projecting them hopefully for entering that workforce too,
Okay, so I'll be quick. It's really very, very similar. And I apologize. I forgot to say that these results that you see on the screen right here are US results. We're confident that the numbers are going to be, the percentages were pretty much the same for Michigan. Let me get my cursor. So for the US supply chain, the employment level in 2023, according to this database we have, was 63,667 across the 11 sectors of the supply chain. And the 3-digit NAICS code analog to that same number, you can see on the screen with, again, a very, very large share, I didn't put the shares, but the actual numbers, 22,335, which is the electrical equipment, appliance, and component manufacturing. And then we show on the right-hand side the projected employment, and again, we're holding mining constant, but we then have a proportional relationship in the output function, as I described before for Michigan, so that we're projecting the employment will grow from 63,000 to 310. What's again very important is what does that mean in terms of the distribution of occupational employment? And so what I'm showing you on this is I think there's a couple flips. Like I think business operations specialist might have been a little bit higher than material mover, et cetera, but pretty much it's the same cast of characters, if you will, that are showing up in terms of the employment levels that will change. And what we're showing here is employment changes. So for example, assemblers and fabricators, we are projecting will change by 34,000, but with an annual job openings of 4427. Again, that's what's really critical in terms of workforce development. Just to make sure everyone's clear on the median salary, we don't project salaries. What we do is we use the base year, which is 2023. I didn't say what the database was, but it's an absolutely wonderful database if you're not familiar with it. It's the Occupational Employment and Wage Survey. It is produced by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it has data at the national, at the state, which is what we use, and also at the MSA level. And then again, I have 2 slides that show all the different, it's actually 3 slides that show all the different occupations. One of the things that I thank you for letting me show the slides. There is a slide here that we have a song that I can sing this, but I have to show this slide to everybody. I'm teasing about the song, but this is our use of the NatBat database is one where when we send out these slide presentations, we attach the slide, which is basically terms of use. And the use that we have in an academic research report like this is exactly what they were intending. So that is it.
Mike, thanks for saying that. And the other thing is too, is what I did not say, and of course, me being with the Water Rising Institute, I always say that there are also jobs that are supporting water quality that you didn't put in your report. So we need to have you put, because those jobs are important. Sure. And as of right now, we are in the water sector is going through a global workforce shortage, and including with some of those jobs that you also just said that people that are managing water within the plants and everything else are also another important factor. So
right.
Yeah, so thank you so much, for answering that. So I'd like to also bring back Rachel and Hillary on. Oh, wait a minute. I guess we have another question in the chat before Mike. You're a popular man today. Let me go ahead and do this real quick. Okay. Okay, Michael, has this data also been fed to the LI Bridge, Lee Bridge?
Yeah, that's you might want to ask the speaker to define that.
Yeah,
LiBridge is LiBridge is the industrial I guess study work group that was commissioned by the federal government at Argonne National Labs, but they tend to canvass a lot of the information that's being generated and analyzed.
So I don't know the exact answer to that question, but we've shared the report with all the folks that we talked to at the Department of Energy who guided us to the NatBat NREL database. But yeah, I welcome suggestions of any group that we could talk to, because part of this is we want to get feedback in terms of how to improve the assumptions of our analysis. So if you've got contacts there and you can share them in the chat or send me just send me a link, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll look into that for you because, but I think if you work with NatBat, they have a strong voice there as a consolidator of data as well. So I think we're already working with the right people. I believe so, but I'm going to do a double check.
Okay? They've been they've been very helpful to us.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm also going to say, I mean, just bravo with our hosts, with also the workforce intelligence network on their data, and I know a lot of the things that you have too, Michael, is also part of that. So it looks like we've got another question. In the Q&A, no, I guess that's it. Okay, I'm just reading as we go along. Okay, so if we can bring back Hillary and Rachel, we do have a few questions for Deloitte, if you would mind coming back in. All right, thank you. So I know it's early in California. I felt crazy being late when you guys are just like really like sleep deprived at this point. So, all right. What do you think will generate AI's most impactful use case? And then will they be focused on efficiency gains or innovation, new products and services? I know it's two questions, so maybe the two of you can.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Lucia. I'll take a first crack and then I'll pass to Raquel. So I think that the cool thing about generative AI is that Deloitte is both an advisory and an implementation house. And so we're seeing these use cases pop up live and getting to both advise clients on them as well as implement them. So what I'm personally seeing a lot of around our workplace is sales enablement use cases. I think that is a really easy plugin. I shouldn't say easy, good fit plugin for generative AI. But I think from a broader point of view, what we're seeing is this need for a problem first approach. So it's looking at generative AI as a tool in a tool belt, right? And so it's just one tool. And instead of starting with a generative AI solution and trying to force it into your product or your problem, it's looking at the problem, asking what the problem is, what you're trying to solve, and what realistic solutions there might be for the problem that aren't necessarily an emerging technology like generative AI, but then looking at, okay, if generative AI is the correct solution, then how might we actually implement this and adopt the solution? And so this problem first approach is definitely serving better. And I think efficiency gains and innovative new products and services, I would say the both of those. Raquel, anything to add on that?
No, I love that point. I mean, I spent the earliest parts of my time at Deloitte working on our blockchain and digital asset practice. And so when you talk about leading with problem first, there's so many times when I would have clients come and say, we want blockchain. And I'm like, you just want a better database, or you want trust in your system, right? And so I think it's really important, the note you brought up, which is, although we do talk about tech trends broadly, all right, and how these technologies intersect and interact with one another, it really is about business value and the problem you're trying to solve at the end of the day. And so I think with that as your North Star, you're not going to go wrong.
So Hillary, Raquel, thank you for that question. And I'm just going to say, and I know that a lot of the governments are also Deloitte's clients. We are so far behind in getting governments to with where they need to be. And I know that this was not a technical question that was asked, but I just wanted to say that out there. What can governments be doing more to be supporting the future of that, especially with when budgets are so constrained, and being able to have those decision-making support systems within government and making those decisions? What are you advising them on this?
Yeah, I can take this one to start. I spent quite a bit of time working in our government practice, and I'll say there's some really interesting things that are happening, because I think we all have room to improve, but I will say when you're planning for implementations that are 10, even 15 years out, right, you have to think about the future, because by the time you're getting around to implementing those systems and programs, an entirely new paradigm could have taken place. And so part of the work that I think Hillary and I enjoy most that we get to do with our government clients is planning for that future and really taking a proactive approach, not just thinking about the next year or two, but really thinking about the next decade, because some of these programs take longer to implement. And another positive I'll say is that there's a lot of innovation happening, and some of the government lens, especially in the DoD military side of the house, that we see then trickle down to the commercial side. So lots of innovation. I would say one of the biggest opportunity spaces that I see in government is the ability to work across multiple agencies, multiple parties, and that efficiency. I hope that the technologies we implement can make that that coordination, even like generative AI for data collection, right? What does this government agency have to say about that? Or, drawing unusual suspects of insights across agencies. I think that's one of the things I'm keen on, but we're all along on this journey together, whether it's, government or commercial clients.
Raquel, thank you for just addressing that, because I know that we have quite a few people on from government, and it is, I have to say, I mean, some of my clients are government, and it's a challenge, and also the workforce is not trained, which is another thing. And Michael just said, has Deloitte looked at occupations that will be affected by AI, and how? Michael, that's a great question. Yeah.
Hillary, I'm happy to kick off with this one too. Just maybe I'll start with my Raquel Buscano perspective to start, which is we do get this question a lot, which is AI is coming in. What does that mean for jobs, right? That's the question we get. That's also the public sentiment and narrative that's in the news, right? It feels like that question is circling around us. I think that companies right now who are looking to implement AI, if they are looking to implement AI simply to reduce headcount, they might achieve short-term efficiency gains. I'm not going to deny that. But I will say, I don't think that positions them for long-term success in the same way that manufacturing capabilities might have been everything gets offshored. Now it's like, well, you've got current, supply chain considerations or cost efficiencies have changed, right? And so now you're saying, well, maybe we want to reshore, and now we want to figure out that optimal mix. If you are trying, you can't shrink your way to success. And so if your goal is just to get rid of headcount all the way down, well, you're going to be left with a company of zero. And I think the smarter organizations right now and adopting AI aren't looking at it to say, replace Toby in IT. They're looking at it to say, how can I make Toby 5 times more efficient than he was before? And if that's the way you're using AI, well then, man, Toby's just become a superhuman, right? He hasn't gotten rid of your value skyrocket. But I do see businesses taking 2 lenses. There's some that are really using AI to fuel their people. There's some that are reducing headcount. And I think the ones that are thinking about AI as a long-term play are going to be better positioned in the future.
Alicia, do you mind if I just make a quick observation? So I think you're exactly right. What I was thinking about in terms of AI is both from a risk and a repetitiveness profile, so that occupations that carry high risk, medical, if you make a mistake, somebody gets injured, that's much more likely to have AI as a companion. But ones where it's repetitive, even if it's skilled repetitive, like doing summaries of legal briefs for precedents in a court case, that may change the capital labor ratio, so that you're not getting rid of people per se, but that the number of research associates you have 10 years from now could be dramatically different than what you have now because of the use of this, quote, capital. I think of it as a capital usage, and the risk of getting rid of somebody in terms of using the wrong precedents is just not as great as the risk of harming a patient.
No, and Michael, thank you for stating that. And I think that that's just really a good segue to really go into Kevin's presentation. So Raquel and Hillary, thank you so much. Kevin Krenick is a senior economy research analysis for WIN. In his role, he performs research and analyzes for the education workforce and industry partners by fulfilling data requests and writing quarterly labor market reports and special research projects. Prior to joining WIN, Kevin served as the Director of Marketing at Ann Arbor Associates, Inc., a Michigan-based opinion research firm serving the healthcare industry. There, he spent 8 years nurturing relationships and developing business prospects with clients in over 30 states across the country. Much of his day-to-day work also entails a statistical testing and analyzing services for major health systems, including Spectrum Health, Lakeland and Schoolcraft Memorial Hospital. Kevin was born and raised in northern Michigan, go Yuppie, and with a nature and with a natural love for the outdoors. He received his undergrad degree from Lake Superior State University and later completed his MBA at the University of Michigan. Go Blue. Kevin?
Wonderful. Thank you for the introduction, Alicia. I'm going to go ahead and get my screen share going. And if I could get a confirmation from anybody in the chat when that is being shown in presentation mode, that would be great.
You see it. Thumbs up.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us today. I can't express enough how wonderful listening to my fellow presenters has been. I think there is so much attention being given to the evolution of technology right now, and in particular, artificial intelligence. I know we've had a keen eye towards some of those developments here at WIN, so that's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate the content from everybody today. Mike Horgan, thank you so much for the updates on the EV sector. I just can't express enough how impressed I am by the co-presenters today and all the data that they've shared. So
I think you're
Kevin, you
unmuted.
accidentally muted
You're
yourself.
muted. Yeah, Kevin, you're muted.
Oh, goodness. Thank you so much. So I've been with WIN since October 2022, coming up on my second anniversary with.
Yeah, Kevin, you keep getting muted. I don't know what's going on here. So
Not
weird.
sure what's happening
I'm telling
either.
you, Teams is just totally acting up today. It's deciding to mute people, not letting people in. Just go with
Okay.
it.
All right. Well, I will try and keep a close eye on the mute button. I'm nowhere near it right now. I've confirmed the cursor is very far away, but
Yes,
thank you for keeping me on track here. So we'll do our best, hopefully with minimal interruptions. But today I wanted to present on the 2023 labor market findings. So as Alicia mentioned during the introduction, the team over at WIN, specifically the data and research team, compiles these reports every quarter for the city of Detroit, as well as for the 19 counties which comprise the WIN region. We also complete once per year the annual reports for each of those 19 counties that comprise the WIN region, in addition to the city of Detroit, the WIN region as a whole, and then the state of Michigan as well. Those reports, for anybody who's interested in viewing them, are available on winintelligence.org. And if you'd ever like to discuss some of those reports, we're more than happy to answer questions about them. Today, I'm hoping to give a summary of the latest annual reports. So looking at the labor market reports that we develop, I quickly wanted to cover what some of those data sources are, because I think it's important to appreciate that this is not just a one source thing that we throw together. We bring in data from 4 different sources in order to complete these reports each quarter. So that includes census data, data from Lightcast, which provides a lot of information from our job postings, as well as what the employment volume looks like in the state of Michigan. We utilize local area unemployment statistics, and then US Census on the map data as well. So I wanted to kick things off with a quote that I pulled directly from our latest reports. This is from the State of Michigan report, and I thought it would really help to set the table in terms of where the labor force is headed and what some of the key observations are that we are seeing with the labor market reports. So there's 2 specific data points that I want everybody to pay close attention to here, and that is that the labor force increased by over 121,000 individuals in 2023, while employment increased by 131,000. The reason that that is very important is because, as we will see in the coming slides, labor force participation in Michigan has been lower in recent years than it had been in decades past. When we see an increase in the total labor force and then a marginally higher increase in employment, what that suggests is that for every incremental person that is added to the workforce, they are more likely to be employed than to not be employed. So that's great news for Michigan, because it means fewer jobs left unfilled. It means that for every person who becomes working age, they are more likely to be participating and to be working. So that's a great finding. It was a wonderful update to see from our 2022 labor market reports. And then to take that one step further to extend the good news, we've seen unemployment drop by more than 10,000 workers. So when you couple those items together, we are seeing stronger labor force participation, we're seeing lower unemployment, and in fact, as we will see in the next few slides, the unemployment rate is at a very impressive level currently. So as indicated by this slide, that is down to 4% in the state of Michigan. So this graphic may look familiar to some. Anybody who's viewed our labor market reports online might recognize that distinct orange. And when we compile these graphics, we like to compare the labor force against the employment and the unemployment rate. And you can see from the latest figures from 2023 there that they indeed reflect all of the items that I just mentioned, that we see not only an increase in labor force, but an even sharper increase in total employment. And then we also see, as a consequence of that, lower unemployment rate. So I was very curious because the scope of the WIN research and the labor market reports that we develop typically only goes back about 10 years. In fact, we can see from this graphic that the most data available in a given labor market report is a 10-year window. We were so impressed by what we were seeing, in fact, looking at this blue line, which indicates the unemployment rate, that we felt compelled to explore this even further. We wanted to see how low is this unemployment rate compared historically, not just in the last 10 years, but when we look back even further, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. So we did exactly that. We went back 50 years, all the way back to 1970, and the current unemployment rate in the state of Michigan for the calendar year 2023 is one of the lowest annual unemployment rates that we have seen in the state of Michigan since 1970. So I believe when I plotted it on a matrix, it came out to, I think, the third or fourth lowest. It was certainly in the top 5 across annual unemployment rates for the state of Michigan. So that's incredibly meaningful. It means that despite what we may hear on the news from a day-to-day basis, people are working, people are finding jobs, and that's a great thing for employers as well, because it means employers are filling jobs. It means that there is demand that's being met. So we were really impressed to present that finding as well and to share the extension of that timeline here today. Furthermore, when we look at the 19-county WIN region, we saw an even lower unemployment rate. So if you view the labor market reports for the workforce that we analyze, the WIN region, the 19 counties that encompass the WIN region represent, I think, 64% or so of the total labor force in Michigan. So to see that representative sample have an even lower unemployment rate than the state overall is very encouraging, because that means in the highly populous areas, the highly concentrated areas of workforce, there is even lower unemployment rates than what we see at the state level. So lots of really encouraging data from the latest labor market reports. When we look at labor force participation rate, I mentioned previously that it is at not an all-time low and it's not historically low, but it is the best that we've seen in the last 10 to 15 years. I had to go back to 2009 or 2010 to find better labor force participation rates. All of this coupled with the 6th highest annual population measure in Michigan history. So all of these metrics are very encouraging, especially when we consider some of the things that we've heard in other presentations. I know when we've listened to the governor give some speeches about Michigan's population, and anybody who's been plugged into what has been happening with Michigan's population over the last few decades knows that our population has been largely stagnant. Compared to all of the other states in the United States, Michigan is one of the slowest growing over the last 3 to 4 decades. So the fact that we have the 6th highest population in Michigan history, so just benchmarking against ourselves there, is really encouraging when we plot that against the other metrics being shown. So we have higher population in general, higher labor force participation in general, and subsequently lower unemployment rate. So all of these are really encouraging metrics. We were very happy to be able to present them today. And then we also wanted to share that across the WIN region, most areas have fully recovered the losses that were experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's no surprise when we look at the year 2020, there's that steep drop off. That, of course, no surprise, is due to what occurred with COVID-19 in the state of Michigan, as well as across the United States and worldwide even. But the fact that we have fully recovered in most areas is also very encouraging. It shows that jobs have been reinstated. It shows that people are going back to work. And I think just this one slide alone, there's so many key takeaways that are worth sharing. We were very happy to be able to show that today. Now, we also wanted to look at some annual workforce indicators. So those of you who have already seen the annual reports, this is going to look very familiar to you. I wanted to give all of the good news first, because what some might perceive as bad news, I think there's more than one take for this, but let's start from the left-hand side here. The employer demand, which we use job postings as a proxy for employer demand in our labor market reports, did in fact decrease by 20.2%. So that was a change of almost 330,000 job postings from 2022. So we've seen a very steep drop off in employer demand, again, as measured by job postings in the state of Michigan. Now, we had a very difficult time trying to identify what was the underlying cause of that. And I think there's still room for speculation. Is that due to the already very, very low unemployment rate, such that the jobs that were created, they've been filled now? So there's just far less need. And it's no surprise when you consider that it would be impossible to have full employment, 100% employment in any scenario. Even the states that have outperformed Michigan in the past, they still have unemployment rates at or near where Michigan is currently. So the fact that we've achieved such low unemployment rates, I think, plays a very big role in why we are seeing this drop off in job postings. But I also think it's important to give credence to the fact that this may also potentially be an indicator of slowing economic demand. So we'll get into some of those metrics a little bit further in other slides, but for the other key indicators, the high school diploma was the most in-demand education across the state of Michigan in 2023. So what we look at is the breakdown, and in fact, we will see in another slide what the distribution of educational demand is across employers from the state of Michigan. And a high school diploma still has tremendous value with employers. They want to know that employees or prospective employees have attained what many would consider to be the lowest bar, the lowest entry point for many jobs, because it demonstrates that the students can at least complete what is otherwise expected of them from a secondary education point of view. And then lastly, the Q4 2023 employment totals were just over 4.85 million in Michigan, representing an increase of just under 200,000 workers, or 4.2% since the year prior. So getting a little bit further into the job postings data, this is where I think people who see this without context might have a little cause for concern, because we're seeing a downward trend. And I think intuitively, for many of us, seeing a downward trend on many things, especially when it pertains to workforce and the economy, is generally not a great sign. However, I think it's important, revisiting what I said on the last slide, that we have to consider all the factors that are feeding into this outcome. Is this due to a slowing economy in Michigan? Is it due to the fact that we are peaking near our unemployment lows? So I think there's a number of factors that need to be considered looking at why we're seeing this trend. Because if you were to plot this on the same chart as the unemployment rate, you would see an inverse relationship. Right? As we see the unemployment rate go down, we're also going to see the job postings decline because jobs are being filled. Now, we also see in Q2 of 2023 that there was a little bit of a spike. This is not uncommon to Michigan specifically because of the strength of our tourism industry. I think it's no surprise that when we look at some of the top posted jobs, we see a lot of hiring happening with customer service workers and first line supervisors of customer service workers and fast food workers. All of these things align with seasonal changes in the Michigan economy due to our very strong tourism again. So I think that in part plays a big role in why we typically see stronger participation and job postings in the second quarter of each year. But another data point that really stuck out to us was the fact that entry-level jobs saw a pretty sharp decrease in Wayne County specifically. Now, we aren't sure if this is due to a shift in the job market dynamics, i.e. the types of jobs that employers are seeking to fill, or if this is due to, again, a localized economic downturn. So there's a few different things that could be contributing factors, but this is what we try to look at in the labor market report overview that we provide. Now, another thing that I've been made aware is of great interest is the commuting patterns in Michigan. And Alicia, please help keep me on track here. I did not start my timer as I typically do. So if I start getting close, I'll try and run through things a bit faster. I wanted to look at the commuting patterns because this is something that I know when I first started at WIN, I was completely unaware that this data set was even available, but the more time I spend with it, the more intriguing it is to me. And what was really interesting looking at these latest reports in 2023 is finding that there is nearly a 2-to-1 ratio of people leaving Michigan to go to work every day compared to those commuting in. Now, we don't have a good way to reconcile what that means for remote employees working for an out-of-state employer because this is strictly commuting data. So I do still think it's an important metric to consider because it gives one pause to sit and ask why. Why are we seeing nearly 2 times more people leaving the state for work than we have people coming into the state of Michigan for work? Now, when we consider the geography of Michigan, that's very unique as well, because not only do we have very strong proximity to Ohio, to Wisconsin, but also to Canada at more than one entry point in the state of Michigan. So it's really interesting to see that the contrast from import to export in terms of labor is so strong one way versus the other. So I thought it would be interesting to get into that a little bit further. As the second data point alludes to there, the characteristics that we're going to see on the next slide are actually very similar. So I'll go ahead and jump over to that next one. We thought it would be interesting to look at why are people leaving Michigan, or why are people driving into Michigan for work every day? Unfortunately, there's not a lot of suggestive data available, at least from the same data source. So both of these last two slides, including the current one, came from the US Census on the Map data, which I mentioned was one of the 4 sources that we use for the labor market reports. But when we compare any 2 data points against each other, the top table showing outflow job characteristics and the bottom table showing inflow characteristics, none of these data points are much different. They're not dissimilar from one another. So for example, workers age 29 and under who commute out of Michigan to another state or perhaps to Canada, That's sitting at 24.7%, about 30,000 people. When we look at the inflow characteristics, it's 26.7%. And I believe looking at the table in its entirety, 2% is about the upper limit that we see in terms of the difference from outflow or people who are leaving the state versus inflow, people who are driving into Michigan for work every day. So I think it's really interesting to see the similarities because to me, it suggests that these jobs are available, right? There's not a particular reason that somebody 29 and younger would drive out of Michigan for work when, from a proportional standpoint, half as many are driving into Michigan. I think what that might suggest is that there are just fewer total jobs available. And if that data point is accurate, or excuse me, if that statement is accurate, if it holds any credence, then it does in fact align with what we're seeing with the unemployment rate because there are just fewer jobs to go around. So I at least wanted to demonstrate that the data is there to show us where Michigan folks are going and where out-of-state folks are commuting into, what types of jobs they're seeking in terms of their age cohort, their earnings per month, or the industry that they represent. There's not a significant difference in any one of these categories. Now, I also wanted to take a brief look at interior commuting patterns. So now we're isolated to Michigan workers. Where are the people who live in Michigan commuting to, and where are they commuting from? Now, it's no surprise looking at the most dominant locations, Wayne County, Oakland County, Macomb County, some of the most populous areas in the entire state. They are more or less exchanging workers. If we look at these two charts together, where Michigan residents work and where Michigan workers live. So it's interesting to me to see, especially looking at those first two, Oakland and Wayne County, they're essentially trading workers, right? So I think a lot of that has to do with proximity as well as population share. But it's also important to consider who comprises the rest of the list. We see Kent County coming in at the number 3 spot, and then for where they work, and then Kent County at the number 4 spot for where those workers live. And going all the way down to Saginaw County. Saginaw County happens to be where 1.9% of Michigan residents work, but they do not even make the top 10 for where the workers live. So looking at the interior commuting patterns is also interesting because it does deliver some insights as to where people are going and how far they're willing to travel for work. And it looks like I am running a little short on time. I do want to make sure we leave room for questions at the end, so I'll try and pick up the pace a little bit here. I also wanted to look at the baby boomer transition. So Michigan, like many other states all over the country, we are facing an aging populace. What was particularly interesting?
I came in the other day for an appointment, and then we made.
Thank you. Looking at the 19 county wind region specifically, so I want to make sure that we're very clear. This data point focuses on the wind region because some of the other data points that we had already shared pertained only to the state of Michigan. So now we're honing in on the wind region specifically. What was very interesting was seeing that according to the census data, we've reached an inflection point between the older generation of workers and the younger generation of workers. So we are taking the prime age workers out of the equation, or those between the ages of 25 and 54, and looking only at those under 25 or those older than 54. In 2023, the labor market data suggests that both of these groups represented exactly 30.9% of the population. So I think it's really important to consider what that means for the state of Michigan, because we do see headlines suggesting that people are working longer into life. People are extending their anticipated retirement age for one reason or another. And I don't want to get into speculating why that might be. I think some reasons are more obvious than others, but what we are left with in terms of facts is when we compare this data point to just 1 year ago, 26.3% of the population was over 54. So we've seen more than a 4% increase in the older population, whereas the younger population, those under 25, fell from 34.6 to 30.9. So we've seen a relative change from a population that was more represented by younger folks to now it's very dominated, or excuse me, it's not yet dominated, but it soon will be. In fact, when we produce the reports next year, it won't surprise me one bit to see that those over the age of 54, the baby boomer generation, will comprise a much larger share of the total population in Michigan. Again, that's not unique to our state. We're going to see that all over the country, but I do think it's going to have important implications for the workforce, for labor development, and what we need to do in terms of training and upskilling. So another data point that I wanted to share is that when we couple this with declining birth rates, that's another thing that's very important. In fact, the Lightcast, which is one of our data sources, they did a summit at Lansing Community College recently where they shared about the declining birth rates, particularly since COVID-19. And I think when you consider those two data points together, it paints a very unique picture that Michigan needs to consider in terms of addressing our talent needs. Okay, so getting into the last few slides here, I mentioned that we would revisit the educational needs in the state of Michigan. So again, we use employer job postings as our proxy for demand in terms of what people are looking for from a credentialing standpoint. So for the WIN region specifically, we mentioned that high school diploma was very high in demand. It was the most in demand credential. Bachelor's degree is a very close second. And in fact, when we look at the WIN region, we almost see these two data points between high school and bachelor's degree flip. So there is a difference based on where you live in the state. And then we also can see that associate's degree, master's degree, and PhD does make up meaningful representation for the other credentials that employers are seeking. So the gap is also widening. So looking again, this is state of Michigan data. The gap in demand for high school diploma and bachelor's degree did increase from Q4 2022 to Q4 2023, whereas last year, the difference between those two was only 0.1%. We see a 1.5% difference in the 2023 labor market reports, as we can see from the graphic on the left, or excuse me, the graphic on the right. So it's important to consider why some of those changes are occurring, what we need to do in order to keep up with employer demand. But when we try and tie the unique data points from all three presentations today together, I think it bears considering why we're seeing these shifts. What are the underlying causes? I think there's a lot to be said about AI. I loved the AI presentation that Deloitte gave because WIN has been doing a lot of research in that space ourselves. But I think until we start to see the actual change in job postings, which is such a strong proxy for what's happening in the state of Michigan, I don't think we're going to have any conclusive answers, but I think the writing is on the wall and we can start to think about how to address some of these challenges. So with that being said, this is my final slide and I'll open it up to questions.
Yeah, no, Kevin, thank you so much for these stats, and it is really important, especially on the commuter, aspect of just kind of seeing with people, are commuting and how that also, is affecting, some of these trends. So we have a question here. So did the occupational value demand by employees cite as a BS degree, not a BA degree, in applied engineering technology for occupational career development in the long term, not just in entry level?
I'm not sure. I would have to revisit the labor market reports to look specifically at engineering and the educational demand. But I do want to take the opportunity to mention again that these labor market reports, including at the state of Michigan level and the WIN region, depending on which geographic focus is most important, we do have an industry level breakdown for each of these occupation groups. So for example, looking at IT specifically, engineering specifically, we do have all of those breakdowns. So my short answer is I can get that for you, but the better answer is You could probably beat me to it if you jumped on our website and
So
we could have that
actually,
info
it was
before
for
we're even done
Mike.
here.
Because I apologize. It was actually for Mike. So,
Okay.
so it wasn't for you. Sorry, Kevin. Sorry.
Nope,
Sorry,
that's all right.
Yeah.
Take it away, Mike.
So yes, Mike, if you want to answer that question that I asked, or do you want me to repeat it? Happy to repeat it. It is a Friday, so
Yes.
yeah.
Oh, no, that's fine. I was thinking about, so what we have is engineers, and then again, we have the detailed types of engineers underneath. And so the thing that we are trying to figure out is, did we get it right in terms of which engineering occupations are going to be the ones that are most demand? I will say, and this is sort of coordinating with the last talk, is the data on educational attainment is based on entry into the occupation, and it's not a career path. So, for example, you may, a typical entry level requirement may be a bachelor's, but if you look at the CPS data, for example, you may find an entire distribution of educational attainment among engineers, some who have gotten masters, so it doesn't end just with taking the job. So I think the true answer to the question that was asked is the educational distribution is not, you can't just look at the entry level requirement. It's really looking at the occupational distribution for the entire occupation.
No, thanks for stating that. And if I can bring all of our panelists back on again, I would just like to, I always like to close this out, and we're also welcoming additional questions. And so from a futuristic perspective, is that if you could make a futuristic prediction, we're gonna test the panel for our own AI capacity, right? And if we could have a futuristic view, especially within the next, 5 years on the workforce development aspect, and then also taking in from the baby boomers shifting, right, into, retirement and everything else, what would be your what would be not just your prediction, but would also be your solution to getting people to enter into the workforce, into some of these jobs? So I guess we'll take it from maybe Raquel first, and then we'll ask Michael then, as well as Hillary, and then to Kevin. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the things that I think about a lot is in universities right now, how many students are using AI, right? It's table stakes for them as part of their research, right? So much different than any of us might have been when we were in school. And so much of the workforce of the future is going to be AI enabled from the get-go. They're not going to need trainings on how to incorporate AI into their work or their process. They're not going to go through the transformation. They are living it. And so I think this offers two things. One, I think that companies and organizations who can acknowledge this, that, hey, listen, we need to take advantage of this, and we need to have AI-enabled workflow to be able to bring in this next generation. I think those companies are going to succeed. But I also think, the other consideration, Alicia, was, well, what happens when people are retiring, right? Do we have the workforce of the future we need to be able to enter these jobs? My hope is truly that maybe we don't have as much of a workforce as we'd like, but through AI enablement, we can still achieve the same output, even with a smaller reduction in the number of people. And so it actually offers me a lot of comfort that we will see a younger workforce that's AI enabled, that I think can handle the changes that we'll see from a retirement perspective as well. But Hillary, I know you work in this space. You've been doing AI projects. You're living it much more deeply. What do you think here?
Absolutely. I'd really echo everything that Raquel said. I think we are seeing interesting trends in not only universities. Recently, I think last week or a couple weeks ago, Wharton got, the business school got enterprise GPT license for all of its students. And it's come completely part of the curriculum and expected. And then we're also seeing law firms start to teach use of generative AI tools as part of their curriculum as well. And so I do think that the workforce, these tools will be incorporated natively, kind of like what we thought of as digital natives in previous generations. And the task will be for the companies that these new folks are joining to be able to like properly leverage those folks and their kind of inherent skill sets.
Raquel and Hillary, thank you so much. Michael, your thoughts?
So I want to echo some of the same, but I want to do it with one piece of data that I think is just striking. Between 2012 and 2022, according to the Congressional Budget Office using CPS data, the average monthly change in employment was 131,000. Now, this morning it came out at 270, but we're still recovering from the pandemic. But 131 is kind of an average of good months and bad months, right? If you follow the monthly number, 180, Wall Street says, yeah, this is good. If you look at the same CBO estimates for 2022 to 2032, the average monthly change in employment in this country is going to fall to 53,000. And you get the same result, much lower numbers in Michigan, from 6,000 to 3,000. That suggests to me that, yeah, we need AI. We need a lot of things because we're going to need to work. The population of developing countries is going to continue over this period to grow like gangbusters. There's an export market we're going to be competing in. We're not going to reduce as an economy. We're just going to have to learn to make more with far fewer employees. And to do that, we're going to have to change the capital that we're working with. And when that happens, that's going to have a lot of pressure on workforce training and the educational system to develop programs that are relevant to the workplace. And I think the stovepiping that does exist between community colleges themselves and also between community colleges and firms is going to have to, there's going to have to be a collaboration. The other solution I would point to is that I feel, and I don't represent my institute when I say this, but I feel we have to dramatically increase the number of H-1B visas in this country and not make them just for IT-related occupations. 70,000 H-1B visas are snapped up in 2 days. 2 days. We could increase that number to 1 million. And I'm not talking about the border crisis, et cetera. I'm talking about skilled visas. In Canada, if you lose your job on an H-1B visa, you have 4 years to find another job. In the US, if you don't find a job in 6 months, you're kicked out. That's why all the H-1B visa holders are moving up to Canada, especially from Michigan.
We need to be doing more policy on that, because that is a problem with that. But Michael, thank you for stating that. Kevin, you wanna? You're muted.
Oh no.
It's muted
Now
again.
Kevin's automatic mute button.
I guess so. I have two unique perspectives to share. One based on an interview I did with Detroit Public Television recently regarding what we expect to see from artificial intelligence from a workforce perspective. But then the other one, I'm going to deviate off my professional track a little bit and invite anybody in attendance today who might be a parent with a child under 18 at home, a unique perspective to consider there as well. So looking back on an interview I did recently, we were asked about what we expect from artificial intelligence and where we project this is going to go, how it's going to impact the labor market. And that's why I loved Raquel and Hillary's presentation today so much, because it's very near and dear to me and the recent work that we've been doing. One of the things that I like to differentiate, because it's an important differentiator, is whether we are talking about generative AI and its impact on the job market, or AI more broadly in terms of programs that are being developed. I think there's going to be a very different level of impact when you consider whether we're looking at jobs impacted by generative AI or AI programs that are purpose-built to replace an employee. When we look specifically at generative AI, and there's already very good research from many outstanding organizations on generative AI, I loved, and I feel terrible that I forgot who said it, whether it was Raquel or Hillary, that generative AI specifically is a force multiplier. Generative AI on its own is not built to replace human capital. It requires a human to provide those inputs in order to get something of value from it. So by that nature, it cannot replace a human. Will it make humans more productive? Absolutely. There's no denying it. We've seen it personally at WIN already. It's a phenomenal tool. The question of whether there's going to be job displacement due to generative AI specifically really comes down to, I think, the organizational level. I think there will be organizations who see this as an opportunity to trim down, trim off some of the excess. But as I believe Raquel mentioned, I think we are more likely to see innovation taking place. We're going to see people who realize that Joe in IT, he's more capable now. So how can we take Joe's time and re-leverage it into a new income opportunity? How can we generate new revenue streams from this time that has been freed up and just make everybody more productive? How can this make us more competitive? And then the last one, I know we're over on time by a few minutes here, my consideration for parents. Because I am a parent and I have a high schooler here at home, generative AI is a big topic because I know that leaning on a tool, whether it's generative AI or anything else, too much takes away from the fundamental pursuit of knowledge. So we need to encourage in every way possible the fundamental pursuit of knowledge and then use AI to extend our capabilities. The example that I've used in my own home, and maybe this resonates with some of the middle-aged parents in the crowd today, there was a time when I was going through school that the teachers used to say, you can't use a calculator in math because you're not going to have a calculator in your pocket when you're an adult. And now we have cell phones. So I'm not so far removed from my formal education space to be ignorant to the fact that generative AI in its current state, we may all have very, very easy access to this, even more easy than it currently is in the future. So how can we prepare our children, who are the next generation of workforce, for that workforce system? And I think it's a matter of understanding the limitations, but also making sure we encourage that pursuit of domain level knowledge so that we have the expertise needed to get the most out of generative AI. And that's it. I promise I'm done now.
Thank you. So Michelle, thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you, Alicia, and thank you to all of our speakers today. This was super informative, everything that we expected and more. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you for joining. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.